So welcome to this session of the Flame Tree Live and Spooky, which is our first first creepy carnival. And this session is how to query, not how to pitch. I have two fabulous guests with me, as our executive editor, Don Doria, and author and literary agent, Anne Tibbets, both of whom I will now ask to introduce themselves. Anne, perhaps you could say a little something about yourself.
I am in the United States as a literary agent for DeForio Literary Agency. I represent adult and YA thrillers, mysteries, horror, science fiction, fantasy, and the occasional historical women's fiction. I've been doing that for a few years now. Currently also an author. I have a book coming out with Flame Tree in 2021 called Screams from the Void. If you like space horror and monsters, I highly recommend it. And I'm out here in, I wish I could say sunny California, although it's dreary today.
And Don, how's the weather in New York?
Actually kind of dreary here too. You picked a good day for that.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
There isn't much to say. I'm Don Doria, executive editor at Flame Tree, where I edit horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and crime thrillers. I've been an editor for about 25 years, number of companies, usually in those genres. Yeah, I really lead a pretty dull life, so that's about it.
Okay, I happen to know Don is much more interesting than he pretends to be. I'm Nick Wells. I'm the publisher of Flame Tree Press and also of Flame Tree Publishing, where we publish gift books and calendars, illustrated books, fiction, anthologies, things like that. I have a nom de plume as Jake Jackson, and I write music books and edit mythology books. But I'm really here just to moderate between my two guests. And I wonder, perhaps I was going to start with the first topic on my list, really, but you can move in any direction that you might like to, which is really if I was an author wanting to publish, how do I decide whether to talk to a publisher, go to a literary agent, whether I should self-publish? What's the thinking process that I should go through? And have a go at that one.
I think it depends on what you want. Here, what kind of publishing deal do you want? If you want a traditional publishing deal, like you want to walk into a bookstore and see your book on the shelves, then you're going to need to, your better chances of doing that is to get a literary agent, which is the querying process where you write a full manuscript and then you send letters to the agents and then hopefully find a business partnership with an agent. And then that agent will then shop the book to the various publishing houses. That tends to have a lot of people involved. It's a bit slower. It takes a village. There's, production staff and cover design, which you have a say in, but not necessarily control over. So if you don't mind handing your baby off to a group of people that are professionals and then they take and run with it and help you market it and so forth, then go that route. But if you are a very, very fast writer and you want to get a lot of books out quickly, you want to be more hands-on, a bit of a marketer, then perhaps the either hybrid press or a self-publishing route would be your cup of tea, at which point it's more about expediency and reaching the readers on a quicker level, if that makes any sense.
Sure, absolutely. And Don?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the author. Like Anne was saying, if you feel very comfortable doing your own cover design, your own marketing, your own publicity, and you think you will do as good a job as professionals, you can go the self-publishing route. But do bear in mind, most people aren't as good at those things as professionals. I'm biased since I work for a publisher. I tend to think, a publisher is better. Regarding an agent, just a comment, if you are thinking of submitting or being published by one of the big 5 publishers, you will probably need an agent. I don't believe any of the big 5 publishers in the US will accept unagented manuscripts.
Unless they have an open submissions call, which is very rare when that does happen. And even then, if you end up getting an offer, I would still recommend you talk to an agent before you sign anything.
Yeah. So do you think the chances are better going through a literary agent? Or I mean, this feels like sometimes there are 2 stages of querying: one to an agent, and then agent to the publisher. But is that ultimately, you think, more successful with a bigger publisher or with a smaller publisher?
Yeah, I think your chances of getting into a big 5 without an agent are pretty slim. So yeah, if you're looking for a big 5, you know, Macmillan, Hachette, and Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, then yes, definitely go with the querying route first.
And so tell us a little bit more about what a literary agent does. So if someone is lucky enough to be accepted.
What don't literary agents do? I feel like we do just a little bit of everything. Although I am careful to explain that I'm not very good at pep talks to my poor clients. Like, yeah, sometimes it sucks. Sorry. But no, literary agents take your manuscript, and some agents help you edit your work before it goes on submission to publishers, and some agents don't. Depends on the agent and the agency, but they'll help you fine tune your manuscript, and then the agent will basically shop editors and figure out what editors want what and when, and then kind of pick and choose which editors to pitch to, and then they'll send off and then follow up on those pitches. And then hopefully when an offer comes in, then the agent will help to negotiate the deal, contractually speaking, because you should see some of these contracts, they're ridiculous. And the royalty rates and the advances, if that applies. And then for that, the agent takes 15%. And then also assists with various other things like, I don't know, marketing plans, and gives opinions on social media and branding and all that sort of fun stuff, and the occasional pep talk if called upon.
Don, do you have any comments on any of that?
No, I mean, that basically is how I see what agents do. I've never been an agent, but that's how I've seen their job. That's how I've worked with them over the years.
I mean, I often think that one of the key relationships, key points rather of having a literary agent is that they manage expectations on both sides. They know the industry, so they can help an author really understand what is reasonable to expect. Like getting in at the top of the New York bestseller list is not likely on the first book at the first go. Possible, but not likely. And on the other hand, with a publisher, it's also puts a brake on a publisher underperforming or underpaying. It's kind of as a classic standing in the middle and facing both sides.
A middleman. That's nice. That's a nice description.
Okay. But Don, what's the sort of percentage on our own list that comes through from agented books?
In terms of submissions or actually signed books?
Well, both, although I appreciate that's different.
I would say maybe a third agented, because we are open to unagented submissions. And I've found over the years, and this is nothing remotely against agents, I think agents sometimes can be tougher on manuscripts than a publisher, because agents, for obvious reasons, are interested in signing up clients that they believe will sell. So, like, for example, and it's many years ago in the late 90s, I was working for a publisher, and we started a horror line, a leisure horror line. And at that point, no other publishers really were doing horror. And I had a very tough time getting manuscripts from agents at that point, because agents saw horror as a dead genre, no pun intended. So when I would get things from agents, it would be, you know, here's a novel about vampires. It's a fantasy thriller noir. You know, they would call it anything except horror, because in their mind, horror was a black mark, but that's what I was looking for. So, you know, sometimes agents, in my experience, will second guess what editors are actually looking for.
No, I totally agree with that. And there's always somebody out there who's saying like dystopian's dead or paranormal is dead. And then all of a sudden every agent will go through their query list and then, you know, decline all of the queries for dystopia and paranormal, and not really taking necessarily the thought that the market's cyclical. So anything that might not be, nothing's dead. It all just goes dormant for a little while. And then eventually every single sort of trend will end up coming back, you know, if you give it long enough. So you just have to play the market game. And you never know, you could find that one book that restarts the trend. So this is my whole thing with comp titles as well. I have an issue with comp titles for the exact same reason, is because oftentimes if you're looking for that book that's going to restart the trend and you're demanding that they find a comp title that's at least 5 years old, well, it's possible there isn't a comp title within the last 5 years because you're hoping to relaunch. I'm going off on a tangent. I'm going to stop now. Sorry.
No. I think that's a really interesting point, because we moved to Simon and Schuster distribution, and their big thing is comp titles. We've never done comp titles, but comp titles for them basically means they can look back at previous sales and make a prediction. And you know, as a publisher, as the publisher, that drives me crazy, because my job is to look at what I think will work next year, the year after, 5 years, and I don't know what's going to work. So I will look at trends and hopefully collectively we would find something that's really interesting. And what I want to see and what I want to read are really good manuscripts, which might happen to be dystopian or vampire thrillers or whatever they are. And there's this awful tyranny of legacy, and there's the tyranny of the category within the bookshop.
I don't feel it allows for innovation.
I think that's right. Don, what you're frowning, Don?
No, I think it's just my natural frowning face. No, I agree. It's not every book can be compared to something else, and that can be a good thing. If there is nothing like this, you know, it can be good. If you're always going to be tied to comparing a book to another book that's already out, you're not going to get much innovation. I mean, it's just the fact, you know, I mean, you have to be able to allow for something that just isn't like something else.
Yes, I think that's right. It seems to me that the comp title process is to do with scale. So if you're a very big publisher, you've got several hundred books coming out. It assists the salespeople have that initial conversation, but it has very little to do with the sell through. And of course, you know, that ultimately as a publisher and an author process, what you want is as many people as possible to have the book in their hands, to give it the best chance it can. And that's difficult if you're a smaller publisher because your distribution isn't quite as good. On the other hand, there's more room on your list, so you allow books to breathe. You know, so there's always this mediation going on all the time. It's not straightforward.
No, I think, but the idea of the comp titles is definitely, you know, a sales factor. It's something the sales force asks for. It's not something editorial ever asks for, or at least I don't. You know, I mean, if something is too similar to something that's already been published, that's a negative. You know, we already have that book. We don't need this new one. But you know, it's the sales reps and the sales directors that want to know how they can quantify a particular title. You know, if it's like this, we'll probably sell this many. If it's like this, we may sell that many. And it helps them allot their time. Sometimes gives them an excuse if something doesn't sell. But I think it's more a factor of sales than editorial.
I do get notes from editors every now and then when they read a book that might be something they've not quite seen before, where they say, well, I'm just not sure where this fits in the market. To whereas it seems like the comp titles can apply slightly depending on the editor. So as I said, I think I'm one of the few agents out there who hate them as vehemently as I do, because they are kind of a necessary evil when it comes to, particularly with the big five. Big five for sure. I think it tends to loosen up a little bit and give you a little bit more breathing room when you go to smaller presses.
Yeah, well, I think, as I said earlier, that it's slightly to do with the volume, the scale of titles that salespeople have to cope with. But also, if you're in a sales department in a big five publisher, then you are judged in a very particular sort of way, really. Whereas I think if you're an editor and, let's say, a literary agent of a certain sort, you're just looking at something that could work really well. And when you found that thing, you're going to treat it in the same way that you would every other book. Whereas from a sales point of view, there's this kind of emphasis on trying to find the lead title and the next lead title. And where actually when we're marketing books, I'm speaking from our point of view actually, but when we're marketing books and when we're editing books, you need to treat them all equally, because they all have that potential at a certain point in their lives. But once it moves into sales, then there's a different kind of pressure, I suppose.
And I know with a lot of publishers, especially larger publishers, part of the paperwork, although it's not actually on paper these days, but part of the paperwork of doing a deal memo or preparing a contract, it's built in there. What are the comp titles? So I think a lot of times if an editor is asking an agent, what are the comp titles? They just want to know, because they're going to have to put it into their paperwork. It's just built.
Well, they're going to create some sort of P&L, right? A profit and loss margin, so they can kind of guesstimate what the print run is going to be, if there is a print run, if they're going to make an offer, and then, what are the expected sales? So, I mean, I get the purpose of them. I just creatively don't like them.
Yeah, I think they're partly also designed to deal with the fact that the further down the chain you go, the less individuals have the time to read everything that goes across their path. Whereas obviously a literary agent and an editor, you have to read it because you've got to edit it, you've got to make comments on it. But if you're selling it, you're relying on less information and you're moving on to the next title, the next title, the next title. And it's a way of scaling back, and it is problematic. But because at the level we're talking about, which is querying, you have to read it. You have to understand what the thing is. Otherwise, you can't recommend it. You can't make it work. Well,
I think that's key. I mean, ultimately, whether it's however you want to refer to it, querying, submitting, the manuscript is going to be the ultimate test. You may say your manuscript is just like something else, but it's your manuscript that has to hold up. So a comp title, if you're submitting a manuscript, it can be helpful to say, this is like Salem's Lot, or this is like Lovecraft or whatever. But that gives more an indication to me of the genre or subgenre, the type of book. Presumably, if you say this book is like The Shining, you're not expecting the book will sell as well as The Shining. And in horror, since this is a horror panel, everyone has said, if you're doing comp titles for horror books, just leave off Stephen King, because nothing is going to be comparable to Stephen King. Don't kid yourself. Find another author who's not that large a name that you can compare it to, because otherwise everybody's going to say, oh, this is just like Stephen King or Clive Barker or whoever. Here's Neil Gaiman. No, not really.
Yeah, I think that's got to be right, because any big name comes loaded with other expectations, more than just a good manuscript or a good idea. But if I was a new author, would you recommend no comp titles? No, surely you'd.
Well, for me, and this is just me. If if an author is giving me a comp title, they're probably not meaning it in the sort of sales team term of a comp title. If an author says this is like Lovecraft or this is like Neil Gaiman or whoever, I'm assuming they're talking more about the content of the book. You know, this is a Lovecraftian horror, as opposed to saying this is the book that's going to be read for the century. You know, they're describing, I assume, how they see the content as opposed to their expectations for sales. So in that sense, a comp title from an author can be very helpful. You know, it gives me an idea of what other author or book you might have had in mind when you were writing the book, you know, where you see it falling within the genre. You know, if you say this is a book like Jack Ketchum, as opposed to this is R.L. Stine, you know, it gives me a very different view of your book. But presumably you're not talking about how you expect the book will sell, as opposed to the content of the book, the type of book it is.
When you think about it, it's a
nodding.
lot like if you go to a bookstore, there's the end cap at the end of the aisle where they put the face out books that are like, you're, you know, this week in, and then all of a sudden they'll have every single, you know, vampire book out all together. So that's how I feel like an author or a writer when they're querying agents or submitting to editors and publishers that have open submissions, think about where your book would be, what other authors would be with you on the end cap at the end of the aisle at the bookstore.
Yeah, if, you know, sort of like, if you like so-and-so, you'll like this.
Yeah.
As opposed to this will sell just as much as so-and-so. It's a very different question. You know, and a very common thing, and this is very helpful, and I assume, Anne, you've seen this too, you know, the classic elevator pitch. You know, this book is The Shining meets Gone with the Wind. You know, take two books and put them together and this is what you get. That can be helpful too, just because it gives you a concept of where the author sees this book.
So an author's got to be a marketing person then, as well as an author.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, yeah. I don't think, and not to say that it can't happen, that some, you know, I mean, what was the classic story of Thomas Wolfe going into Max Perkins' office with a wooden trunk full of pages, not in any order, and just put them down and left, and Perkins read it, and I think it was Look Homeward Angel, or You Can't Go Home Again, I don't know. You know, it can happen. I think it's exceedingly unlikely. Because basically, as an author, one of the first things you're doing is you're going to try to sell your book to Anne or to me, you know, either an agent or an editor. You've got to sell it to some degree as well. It doesn't do anyone any favors. And I do get submissions like this, and we may want to talk about this later, things not to do. People will literally just say, here's my manuscript. And like, that's their cover letter with an attachment. I don't even know, it could be a book about gardening for all I know. I have no idea. You haven't really piqued my interest to read this manuscript at that point. So even if it's just a good paragraph, you know, something to get me interested in reading the manuscript, you know, you have to sell me first before I can sell anyone else. And I assume that's true with Anne, but I let her speak for herself.
Yeah, I think I got in my first year of agenting over 3,000 queries in the first year. So after you read, you know, 3,000 pitch letters, you tend to form an opinion as to what works and what doesn't work. I ask for sample pages with mine, so I tend to actually skip the pitch first and go right to the sample pages, which is the first 10 pages. If I feel like the sample pages are well put together and the story starts in the right place and it gives me a good sense of where it's going, then I'll go back and read the pitch afterwards. And then I also I ask for a synopsis. I want all the spoilers before I even request the manuscript to read it. So I know where it's headed, because there have been times where I've thought, oh, these 10 pages are fabulous. And then I request, and then I get to the ending and it just doesn't quite land the ending. So I kind of like to know ahead of time before I request the whole thing, where it's headed plot wise, and if it's fixable. So, but yeah, a pitch paragraph, kind of like you see on the back jacket copy, just a pitch paragraph. Sometimes that's enough. And a little bio, just so I know you're, a functional adult and not some 12-year-old or, somebody who's just pulled my name off of the internet somewhere and decide, here's my book, please see attached. That doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So obviously that's after reading 3,000 in your first year, you start to know exactly what is going to draw your attention. Do you think that's common? Is that's how every agent will approach it, because they have the same experience?
I don't know. I think that depends. I don't think every agent works the same way I do. Some of them absolutely will do the pitch first, and because they're looking for a specific type. It also depends. I'm going to go on a little bit where the agent's list is. Like, you have a certain amount of clients that you're shopping at the same time, and if you have all the same type of clients, they're going to overlap each other when it comes to editors and who you can pitch for and when. So you have to diversify your list. So if I am specifically looking for a thriller, then I'm not going to read the pages first. I'm going to look for thrillers first. So it just depends on what I'm looking for and when. If I'm just looking for something to inspire me, then I'll do pages first. If I'm specifically looking for, a genre category, then I'll do it that way. It depends on where you are in your
So presumably, so where you are will depend. It's like having a portfolio of interest, which can shift over time according to whatever. Well, I suppose what the market wants, but also what's available to query. I suppose we have a lot of submissions. I mean, do you read some of the text first, or do you look at the synopsis first?
I look, depending on how much information the author or agent gives in their email. I will first I want to know, is it a genre that we even publish? Because I've gotten things saying, here's my autobiography, here's my collection of poetry, spiritual growth, it's not something we publish. And I'll even get stuff, people saying, I've looked at your list and I see you have so many great autobiographies. And I say, you didn't look at our list. We don't do any. So, first I will look to see if it's something that we would even publish. Then I will look at the synopsis first, generally, unless it's like a 50-page synopsis or something. If it's your average 1, 3, 5-page synopsis, I will look at that first, because I want to see how the plot is going to work out. Then I'll look at the manuscript to see the style. Can the author actually write? So for me, that tends to be the sequence.
That's interesting. My reading is a bit different, because we have these many entries on open submissions for our short story anthologies, which means I read so many short stories, it's unbelievable. And the requirement from a short story is very different. It has to work immediately. It has to work in that first paragraph, which is a bit unfortunate, because that's, from let's say a literary point of view, the point of a short story is not quite the same as a genre-oriented short story. But if it doesn't grab you straight away, then there are hundreds and hundreds of others which need to do it. Whereas with a book, I think if you start to read it, you need to know that it can wind you in, and that the writing itself is good. Whereas there are 1 or 2 short stories that we've ended up publishing where I don't think the writing was particularly good, but it was such a cracking idea that survived the process. So it's a little bit horses for courses. Okay, so we're doing pretty well for time. There are some random issues. Are there some things that we, as an author or a prospective author, one should not do when querying?
Well, I don't think bashing other people's books is an effective method of pitching your own. You'll get the ones where it's like, this is so much better than that Harry Potter trash. And I'm like, Harry Potter did really well. So I don't know why you're bashing it. I call it negging. It's almost like a guy who hits on a girl by telling her how ugly she is. It's like, it's backwards. So you should, definitely try and go with the positive attitude, best foot forward. So I say that's a definite no. I've also had people get creepy with me in inappropriate ways. So it's like, that's not good and I think women have to deal with this way more than men, but it's like, oh, I saw your picture on the DeForio literary website and you're so pretty. So I just thought maybe I would send you my manuscript. And I thought ew, no. So that's a no.
Bad stuff.
Yeah, not too surprisingly, no one has said that to me in my entire career.
This happened just yesterday. I had a friend in an author in an agent's chat group, and she ended up we always laugh and share them with each other whenever we get one, because there's no other way to cope with how creepy it can get. So other than that, so I'm sorry, Don, if you'd like, I can send you one anonymously so you understand what it feels like.
No, I'm perfectly content.
All right, you're not missing much.
No.
And then what do we say? I would say the negative, and we already talked about comp titles being relevant, just because, and the flirting. Other than that, I would say just try and keep it positive, and also not necessarily give me your full life experience. Like, I was born going from birth. I don't need to know that much, and I actually don't need to really know more than that. You're a functioning adult and you like to write, and this is what I write. So that no autobiography is necessary in the author bio.
Before I move on to Don, though, but do you mean if someone considers themselves to be particularly promotable to help sell the book, is that a good thing?
Well, that's a little bit, you're talking about platform. So if they've got a platform and they're like, or they're selling a nonfiction book, which is based on their platform, like they're a promotional speaker or something. I don't do nonfic, but if you're like someone famous and you've got a book that is relevant to your life experience, then yes, absolutely. When you're in your author bio, that's a good point. You should probably mention that. In fiction, necessarily, platform is important, but not as important as it is in nonfiction. So I feel unless you're a movie star, it doesn't necessarily automatically elevate you in regards to whether or not your book is sellable or whether or not you can write. So I just want to know, where you live, what do you do in your day job, and what do you write? And I don't know, maybe some pets.
Pets, okay.
Yeah, like you got a dog or a cat, something like that. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I get long descriptions of people's lives. Just give me the book.
Okay. So Don, pets, you look for pets in the descriptions?
No, I honestly can't, unless it's something really bizarre, like a pet amoeba or something. That's about it.
That would be
yeah.
Inspirational.
I think for me,
horror.
I don't know if it'd be how you would list this as things to do or things not to do. But thing to do would be do a little bit of your homework, look, Flame Tree has a website. We have guidelines. It's not that hard to go to the website and read the guidelines. I get a lot of people, and this is what not to do, who say, I know you say in your guidelines that you top off at about 120,000 words. My book's 260 though. I think you'll love it.
Yeah.
Maybe I will, but I'm not going to read it. I have a lot of stuff to read that fits our guidelines before I start going outside the guidelines. Also, I get submissions, I would love to be represented by your agency. We're not an agency. And it's clearly, I get a lot of these things where it's clearly a form letter, that will actually begin with, to whom it may be concerned, or something like that. And it's the person really doesn't even make any distinction between an agency and a publishing house. Or again, they'll say, here's my book about my experiences as a gardener, that doesn't fit our guidelines. So just do a little bit of the homework, because it really will. I mean, if it's outside our guidelines, it doesn't matter if it turns me off or not, because it's outside of our guidelines. But it will not endear you to anyone that you're submitting it to if you're just blanketing it to everybody without really any regard of who they are or what they are. Other than that, I don't really care much about the person's life. A little bit, like Anne was saying, just what you do in your day job. One thing also, this is a tip that it may not have occurred to people. Don't mention to me, it took me 15 years to write this book, because I don't want to buy just one book. I mean, I've said, often, I'm not buying a book, I'm buying an author. I want someone who will be able to write a book in the next 6 months or a year. I don't want to buy this one book and then have to wait 15 years for the sequel, So just a little
alternately, I get people telling me, this is my first draft, I just finished, and you're the first and only person I've sent it to. That's
also,
great. Send me your 5th draft.
Yeah. Don't send a first draft.
Mm-mm.
And I get people saying, here are the first 3 chapters. Let me know if you like this. If you do, I'll finish it.
No.
And sorry, it doesn't work that way. Or even better, and I think everybody has gotten this over the years. People will say, here are 3 sample chapters. Chapter 3, chapter 8, chapter 14. These are the good chapters.
But this is all surely, this is surely from the University of the Common Sense. I mean, what we're really asking people is to be, to have attention to detail and be a little bit professional. I mean,
yeah. I mean, ultimately,
you're speaking from experience, but I mean, that's ultimately.
Really, to be just a little bit professional is all I'm really asking. I'm not, I realize when people are sending manuscripts, especially if it's the first thing they've written, they're not going to be, pros at this. But, think of it a little bit professionally. Just do a little bit of work, take into account a little bit of who's going to be getting this email. That's all I want.
It is like a cover letter for a job interview. Like there's a partnership that happens between an agent and a writer. So this is somebody I'm hoping to work with, for more than one book. So if you can't be professional and hit the spec requirements for the query to begin, then this doesn't necessarily fill me with confidence that when an editor is giving you a guideline or a deadline, that you're going to be able to follow directions for that either. So it matters.
Yeah, I also think that working together issue is very, very important, that you feel not only can you work together in order to create a better manuscript or the best that's possible out of whatever it is, but also that relationship continues with the publisher, because ultimately we all need to work together in order to promote the book in a very competitive environment. And as publisher myself, one thing I am looking for is often, will this person make themselves available? And as you say, will they turn up on time? And we've had 1 or 2 authors who've been fantastic, actually. But it took a little while just to make sure that they were there. I mean, then promoting their own book on social media and genuinely talking to their friends and their colleagues, because some people almost feel that their job is to write and then they hand it over. But these days, that really isn't the case. It is very competitive. We have to work together and have to be prepared to work together right from the start. Do you think that some of this discussion militates against new writers, or is there always a sense where you're looking for the new kid on the block?
For me, I'm definitely always looking for new writers. It's very important. I mean, and that's part of Flame Tree's motto, isn't it? You know, new voices. We don't want the same authors over and over again. I mean, obviously, if an author has, you know, proven success and a proven fan base, we want to keep them. But the only way any genre can keep going is if you find new authors to refresh it. You know, not to belabor the horror point, but fresh blood is very important in any genre. So, you know, I want the established authors, I want the award-winning authors, but, you know, always, I try to always make a point of having some new authors in there as well. Otherwise, everything is going to be stale.
And you're nodding.
Oh, I totally agree. It's the you want a few of the mid-list authors as well who are good at delivering solid books on time that perform well. So mid-list authors are like the meat and potatoes, I feel, of the publishing industry, and they really don't get enough credit. But yeah, if you can find the fresh voice that you can get the publishers excited about, then they'll typically put more effort into the marketing effort, and debuts can do rather well if given the proper support. So yes, it is important as a agent to look for fresh voices, and as a writer, there's somebody, I don't know who it is, and if I need to talk to this person, is going around conferences and telling people that you're never going to do as well as you will for in advance wise and support with your publisher wise as you do on your debut. So your debut is extremely important. And if you don't debut properly, then it's going to tank your whole career, which I think is hogwash. So whoever that is, I don't know who you are out there. I need to have a conversation with you. So I don't necessarily want every new writer to completely bank their whole career on whether or not they're managed to break out on their debut. I think it's Victoria Schwab. She was like her 9th book that finally hit the New York Times bestsellers list. Like she cultivated her career over time before it completely exploded. So there's also some to be said for the marathon versus the sprint.
Yeah, I think going back to you mentioned Harry Potter a little while ago. I think it was 3 books before that series actually took off, and it was partly the whole film thing as well. But you want to be able to encourage new voices, and from a publishing point of view, that the mix of I think it's very hard from a new writer's point of view. You always assume that there are just so many other writers out there that it's not even worth submitting, but actually quite the opposite. I think from most publishers' point of view and editors' point of view, you really want to find something new, something fresh.
Well, I was just saying, every established author now was a firster at some point, you know, and it is silly, like Anne was saying, to say that, you know, you're going to peak at your first novel. I mean, I can't think of too many offhand, you know, too many cases where that has happened. You know, I mean, I keep going to Stephen King as the obvious example, but Carrie was hardly his most successful novel when he, you know, first came out. I think it sold 2,000 copies. You know, I definitely want an author that we can build over time. You know, we want someone that we can grow. And, you know, I think if I felt that no one is ever going to do better than their first novel, I mean, that would be really depressing.
Yeah.
And our list would look very different. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to try and end it this time now. But if we could end it perhaps with a couple of nuggets of advice from each of you. If you had 2 things that you would advise people the most, what would they be, Anne? In querying or submitting or pitching?
About querying and submitting, follow guidelines. I think we hit that point pretty hard. So follow guidelines, research who you're submitting to make sure that they actually represent and publish what you are writing, and be willing to revise.
Mm.
because there's going to be lots of revisions involved. Don't marry your words. You're going to have to change them at some point. So writing is rewriting. Be willing to grow and evolve.
Kill the little darlings. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Don. What about
I
you,
think,
Don?
I don't know, maybe I might have, come off a little too negative on some of the things that I've said, but ultimately I think things to keep in mind are, do not be discouraged. I mean, a lot of authors that I've worked with for a long time, actually, I've rejected one book and then they resubmitted another book and I bought that, or maybe I even rejected the second book and I bought the third. Not everyone's first book is going to work for so many different reasons. It may hit me at just the wrong time. I might have just bought a book too similar to your book. There may be so many different factors aside from the quality of the writing. So if you get rejected, don't just despair and say, that's it. I'm going to become a haberdasher now, the hell with it. Keep writing, keep submitting. And I think that's the key thing, since this is a panel on submissions. It's been said 100 times, the only sure way to not be accepted is to not submit the manuscript. You have to give it a shot. Make sure the manuscript is as polished as you can make it. Like Anne was saying, don't send your first draft. Make it as good as you can do it, knowing that an editor or agent will probably ask for revisions or maybe edit it, but present your work in as best light as you can, be as professional as you can, and go for it. If you don't go for it, if you don't submit, then you're guaranteed that they're not going to accept it.
I think you put a few hyphens in your two nuggets there. But that was a really, really fascinating session, and I appreciate your time, both of you. So I'm just going to sign off now, and thank you both very much. Bye-bye.